Hello everybody and welcome to another one of our leadership training videos. In these leadership training videos, we have been looking at different aspects of leadership, touching on specific points and areas that will help you in your journey to improve your leadership skills, understand more about what leadership involves, and of course to become more successful. That is the ultimate aim of what I seek to share with you. In today's training, we're going to talk about asking questions. It is so important to not only ask questions, but ask the right questions as well. Now, some of you might be saying, well, I don't know how to ask questions. I don't know why it's important. So let's spend a bit of time just understanding as I unravel some of these and why you'll be able to do it as well if you just focus on some of the key elements that I'm going to share with you. Now, my name is Igwe. I have over 35 years experience in terms of developing, growing and leading teams across 5 major European markets, but also across Europe, Middle East and Africa. And what I share with you on these training videos is really a glimpse, a little idea about what is important and how to use it to leverage your leadership skills. Now, if you're familiar with these videos, then please feel free to like, to share and to comment. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you know when the next videos are coming out and you can keep in touch with what's going on. Asking questions. Before I go into it, let's just take a simple example, because it's not just about leadership, it's about life in general. But let's take leadership for a minute. You may be aware that asking questions, very often we take people into a yes or a no answer in terms of the questions that we ask and how we ask them. These are what we call closed questions. So for example, I say to you, "Hi Chris, how are you?" Your answer is more likely to be fine, okay, whatever. You're not going to give me much more information. So that's not a really great question. In a similar sort of way, if you're in your team or your department and you invite somebody in and you say, "Hey Jane, how are you doing?" She might then say, "I'm fine, I'm okay." But here's the way to approach it. And this is the distinct difference. And I want you to bear this in mind as we go through this. It's not to leave the person with a, "I'm fine," or "Yes, I did this. No, I didn't do it." It's more about getting the conversation to open up. That's what you do when you ask the right questions. So let's take the Jane conversation again for a minute. As a boss, as a leader, hopefully you've got to know a little bit of your team, but if not, this is a good time to start. And you might say, "Hey Jane, how are you? I'd just like to know a little bit more about how things are going. I know it's the early September period, back to school. Things are happening in your life, I'm sure. So tell me, your daughter, what's her name? Jackie. Oh yes, Jackie. How's she doing? I know that you've got to go back to school. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what's going on and how this period might be affecting you of going back to school?" That kind of a question does 2 things. One is, firstly, it shows engagement with the individual you're talking to. The second is it shows that you have paid attention. If she has shared names with you, or you've asked about the family, various members, you know a little bit about what's going on in her life, you can then show that not only asking the question because you like the answer, but you like to know what's going on in her world, because that then gives you some signals as to what might be happening. So the questions have got to be sufficiently open, where you take the person on a journey where perhaps they didn't know they were going to end up. Very quickly, over the years, as I've learned to ask better questions, I've learned to improve the techniques. And often my team members would say to me, "I know that when you ask questions, you always get me to talk, and I don't want to talk." And I'll say, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I'd like to know what's going on in your world." And they might try and pretend or position themselves that they're not going to respond to my questions, that I don't draw them in. But the fun part is it's become as much a keen interest as it is a sort of game for me as well. And in the end, they talk and they'll say, "How come you talk more than you do in terms of questions that I ask you?" I say, "Because I want to know what's going on in your world and in your life, which to me at this moment in time is more valuable than me telling you about what's going on in my world. So that sort of just frames the conversation around questions. So let's get into it then. So like I said, asking questions is about asking the right questions. If you don't ask the right questions, how can you get the right response? Now you may say, well, that's obvious, but let's work through some of the ways in which you can improve the odds for your ability to ask the right question. So when you're asking a question, which can be individual or to a team, by the way, here are some of the things that you need to bear in mind. There are many others, but I've selected what I think are perhaps the most important ones right now. So tonality. When you're asking, the tone of your voice, how do you position the tonality? Because you want that person, once again, it's about drawing them in. Your voice, it's not only the tone, but it's the voice itself. How does your voice sound? How do you use the words? How do you express yourself? What's the rhythm? Is it fast? Is it rapid? Is it aggressive? Is it soothing? Is it embracing? How composed are you when you're having this conversation? Because again, you want to create an environment of trust. Posture. What is your physical posture? Are you sitting in a chair side by side with the other person? Maybe in your office, you're privileged to have a sofa or a settee or something more comfortable than sitting the other side of the desk and asking the person the question. That's not going to embrace that opportunity to chat. Focus. How do you focus that moment, that conversation? You want to take all the distractions out. So there's nothing that is going to interfere with that conversation. How serious are you? If you're asking them the question, are you really engaged? So how do they feel? Oh, this is not serious in the sense of serious as in they're in trouble, but serious as in you're taking that moment seriously. And of course, eye contact is critically important. It's easy to say, but look around you, the number of people who do not maintain eye contact, not only in terms of those who are speaking, but those who are being spoken to. And of course, body language. What is your body language? How do you portray yourself? Because all of this leads to what you're basically saying to that individual is, tell me more. I'm interested, tell me more. Now, there are two main approaches, if you like. There are many in terms of asking questions, but again, going back to your leadership role, you're maybe asking a question because it's a personal question, or you want to engage with that individual to understand where he or she is going, to demonstrate that you care. Because remember, as leaders, we are supposed to care for the people in our care. It's not just about leading them, it's caring for them. It could be that it's a business conversation, business questioning that you're answering. It may be that you want to understand what the progress is that they're making. And so again, similar thing, let's just ask that question I asked before. So let's say you want to know how they're progressing. Imagine you said, okay, John, that report that you're supposed to get in by Friday, is it ready yet? The answer is likely to be either yes or no. It's very unlikely, I imagine, in most cases, that they're going to give you any more information. They might say, John might say, well, it's not quite, but it will be. That's not really helpful to you. You're not engaging in something that enables you to understand what is going on underneath. So a different approach might be, okay, so John, I know you've got this project which is due in on Friday. I hope it's going well. You remember that section on this or that or the other, you define what it is. Have you been able to resolve that? Is that going well? Have you been able to find the resources you need? And can I help you in any different way? So you want to move the conversation such that John then feels, well, he's not being intimidated, that he can actually talk to you about how progress is going, because that's what you want to do. The questions have to elicit a positive response and feeling from the person. But at the same time, like anything, we need to establish some ground rules. And those ground rules are the rules that you set for the others. So maybe it's an individual that you're talking to one-on-one, or it could be the ground rules that you set for a team meeting. So depending on how you set up the meeting or the conversation or the time, bearing in mind that probably a team meeting is more formal. So you may be in a meeting room and you're having that conversation, whereas an individual one, As I said before, you don't want to give the person the impression of being interrogated. So maybe you don't sit the other side of a table, but you sit side by side, or you go somewhere else, a different venue that maybe is more appropriate. But you set the ground rules, and here are some of them. The first is, and I'm going to focus more on the team meetings because that's, I guess, the more valuable one in our conversation today. You point out to people that everybody's opinions, thoughts, and ideas are welcome. So let's say you're asking about a project or something that's going on, or you want feedback on a particular strategy or whatever it happens to be. As a leader, you'll have regular team meetings, I'm sure, or department meetings. Everybody's opinion, thoughts, and ideas are open to be commented on. You say that because you want people to know that they have the opportunity to express themselves. You mentioned that everybody has a voice, so everybody's opinion counts. You have to manage the flow of the conversations, and by that it may be that you ask follow-up questions. So if a question is being answered and you're not too sure, and as you look around the room, you see the others maybe aren't quite sure, you want to ask a follow-up question. Is this what you meant? Or let's take an example. What would that look like? Pursue those so that people know how to answer properly. Another important technique in question answering or asking is repeat a comment that somebody has made. So if somebody says something and you're not 100% sure, or you don't know that everybody has fully understood, say, this is what I've understood or what I've heard. Is this correct, to the person who might have said it? And then they will answer and say, yes, it is, or no, it isn't. This is what I meant. So you help, as previously, the flow of the conversation and make sure nothing is lost. A very, very important one, especially as the leader, silence is okay. Even in a one-to-one, especially in a one-to-one, you don't want to interrupt. Maybe the person is thinking more slowly than you would. Maybe what they're wanting to say is more complex or more difficult. Silence is okay. And that's really something to learn. So in a room where a meeting is being held, a comment or a thought has been made, nobody else seems like they want to pick up the conversation. That's not the time for you to wade in. It's for you to wait in that moment of silence. Like I said before, you maintain eye contact with everybody in the room so that if they're talking, you are focused on them. If they're talking, you're focused on them. If they're talking, you're focused on them. Set out the distractions. Eye contact, so important. And then as you come to the end of the meeting, you summarize. Hopefully you've taken some notes. Maybe your PA has as well, but you should always take notes yourself. And then do a summary of, this is what I heard. And then ask questions again if you're not sure about what has been said. And then depending on the meeting, it may be that your comments or thoughts will be needed. So that's a question. Are they needed at that time? Because bear in mind, you wanted everybody to speak. And so the idea is not then for you to say, well, based on everything I've heard, here's my decision or my choice or whatever. Maybe you've made up your mind, but allow it to go away, think about it, and come back. So maybe it's not needed at that moment in time because your notion of asking questions is to get the best possible responses. And then, of course, and very importantly, thank everybody for their input. Those who shared vocally and maybe those who thought, but because not everybody necessarily is going to talk, even if you allow them to do so. So those are the key areas of what you need to think about when you ask questions. So in summary, asking questions is critically important as a leader. The more you ask questions, and even if you kind of do role play for yourself and you say, well, I know the answer to that, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Or I think probably more importantly, where you have somebody in the team that you want to understand, help, and maybe your next line in terms of management or leadership. Although I'd suggest that you go even deeper. I've had a lifetime of talking to the department assistants, obviously my PA, others in the team. Maybe they're not part of the leadership team, they're not part of the management team. They don't seem to have the level of responsibility. I will always include them, ask them how they're doing, have one-to-ones beyond the annual event and annual review. So ask questions as a leader. It is so important to ask a question because you'll be amazed at the answers that come back and how they can help you in your leadership style and your own growth. So I hope this has spoken to you in some way, shape or form. I invite you to please feel free to comment, like, share, and of course, subscribe to the channel so you know when other videos are going to become available. And I look forward to connecting with you very, very shortly. Thank you.